A lot of folks have said that Kia's K4 sedan is all show and no go. And you know what? They're not wrong. The base model gets 147 horsepower and a CVT that doesn't exactly match the sharp looks that we see here. This is the alternative. This is the GT line with a 190 horsepower 1.6 liter turbo. But it is not trying to replicate the formula that they used to have in the old Forte GT. That one went 0 to 60 in under 6.5 seconds, and it was sort of Kia's answer to the Civic Si. This, it's not that answer. We don't know what the future looks like for the K4 yet. Aside from that upcoming hatchback model, of course, they could bring us a GT trim, but I'd say it's probably unlikely. However, all models have a very similar, very aggressive look. The headlight design does change from the base trim on up to the GT line trim that we're driving today. And yes, this is a GT line, which interestingly you can get with or without the 1.6 liter turbo. And I would definitely get that 1.6 liter, as we'll talk about in a bit. Let me know what you think about the looks though, because this looks pretty sharp in a way that the Civic and the Corolla don't. Those are certainly more under the radar looks-wise, unless we're talking about a Type R. The K4's aggressive design makes sense when you think about who's buying compact sedans in America these days. This one has an MSRP of $31,445, so definitely less expensive than the average new car in America. And the average new car in America isn't even a car anymore, it's a crossover or an SUV. And that's where a lot of families have migrated. That's part of why they can get away with what's going on back here. We have a roofline that definitely drops towards the rear. We have headroom that's pretty similar to the best in this segment, but that's not as good as it once was. And then we have this door handle that's really high, trying to give this maybe a coupe-like silhouette, although obviously we have that door seam right there. As far as a family vehicle goes and a practical vehicle goes, this is not the best design choice. It's definitely very style forward. Practicality behind, perhaps, because a handle down here would be easier for kids to get, and even as an adult, this handle is just easier to use than this one right back here. We'll talk about child seats in a bit, but when you open the door, you'll notice that the opening follows this line here as well. It's definitely more difficult to get people and car seats in and out. And then we have this really coupe-like profile going on back here, or sportback or fastback, whatever you want to call it. But we have an actual trunk lid. I kind of wish that Kia had made all of these sportbacks because we see a lot of practicality in something like a Civic hatch. And in some ways, I would say the hatch in the Civic lineup is more of a direct competitor to this, because if you're looking for this kind of style, you'll find it there. And this doesn't exactly look like a traditional sedan. The designers really wanted to give the K4 a muscle car-like haunch in the back, and you can really see that from this angle where the greenhouse drops down, and then we have that bell shape as it goes down there towards the fender. But they didn't want to make the K4 wider, so the way they did this was by really pinching the greenhouse in as it goes towards the back, sort of like a boat. The downside to that, or the consequence of that, is that back here in the rear passenger area, we get 4 inches less room across the doors than we find in the front. And by the time we get back here towards the rear, this is about 6 inches narrower than this part of the body up front. The design clearly has an impact on practicality, but I suppose if you were looking for a more practical vehicle, you would have bought a Seltos or perhaps a Sportage anyway. We have full LED taillights here, and even in the turbo model, the exhaust tips are tucked up under the bumper. The trunk opening, though, that is not necessarily smaller than average in this segment, and you can actually fit a 43-inch flat screen in the trunk just barely. For better or worse, Kia decided not to simply borrow the drivetrain from the Forte GT. This still uses a 1.6 liter turbo in the top-end trim, but it's down on horsepower, 190 horsepower, 195 pound-feet of torque. And importantly, it's not mated to a dual-clutch transmission or a manual, it's mated only to a traditional 8-speed automatic transmission. If you don't want a CVT, this is one of the few entries in this segment that doesn't have one, and instead has a traditional automatic. You could get something like a Mazda 3, but it has ye olde 6-speed auto, not a nice modern 8-speed, and that does have a huge impact on fuel economy, because this one is rated for 29 mpg, but I'll tell you in advance, we have been averaging 35 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving. Fuel economy hasn't exactly been Kia's forte in the past, but they're starting to change that with some of their more modern engine and transmission designs. Of course, if you wanted slightly better fuel economy in real-world driving, you could get the base engine, but it's 147 horsepower, and it's mated to that dreaded CVT. Also, the fuel economy is not really that much better. What is odd, though, is that even though they're focusing on fuel economy a bit more lately, and they have a lot of hybrids in their lineup, we don't find the hybrid system from the related Hyundai Elantra under this hood, and there don't seem to be any rumors about it coming in the future either. When it comes to front seat comfort, I'm going to give this 8 out of 10 points. We have a power multi-way driver's seat, only 2-way adjustable lumbar support there, and since we're driving the very top end trim, we have 2 position memory over there on the driver's door. You're not going to find all those features on lower end trims, however, and the front passenger seat is never powered. One thing I've always loved about Kias, though, is that we have front seat tracks that are really, really long, as you can see here. I can move this seat, I don't know, maybe about 4 or 5 inches rearward from my comfortable driving position, so if you have really long legs, this is going to be more comfortable than a Corolla for sure. On the other hand, if you have a taller torso, you might want to get something boxier than this. I have about 1.5 inches of headroom in this model with the moonroof option here. If you skip that, you will get a bit more headroom. The story is very much the same in the rear. Lots of legroom, not as much headroom as I might like. Now, if I put my head back here to the headrest, I notice 2 things. The first one is I can't see you because there is that dramatic pillar right there. And I did find myself bopping my head on that repeatedly as I tried to get in and out of the car. Also, this shape and the roofline means it's harder to get child seats in and out of the vehicle, especially in some of the base stations that those child seats dock into just because there's not enough clearance for the handle. If I move over to the middle seat, my hair is definitely brushing the ceiling, but again, relatively comfortable. And it's worth noting that you really won't find much more headroom in any of the compact sedan competition. But you will certainly find less legroom in most of those other options. This front seat is not even all the way back in its tracks. I had a 6'5" passenger sitting up there in a relaxed, reclined position, and as you can see, I have lots and lots of legroom left. Even though this has these hard back covers to the front seats that not only I think look a little funny. They actually kind of function as a hanger, so you can hang clothes or jackets or things like that on the back, but they are a little bulky as well. Now here in the middle, we find something that we don't find in any other K4. If you get the 2-liter engine, you don't get rear air vents, and that's something I really would love to see Kia address. So many companies are deleting rear air vents in sedans. They just don't even offer them at all, that I really wished that Kia had just put that in every trim. At least here we do have the option for the rear seat vents, but you're gonna have to spend over $30,000 to get them. We have cup holders in the center armrest and of course 60/40 folding seats. The 40% side is just behind the driver, which is definitely my preference. But as I mentioned earlier, we definitely have a narrower passenger compartment back here than up front. And it's really something you'll notice sitting behind someone up front. My head is actually offset versus the front passenger's head here by about 2 inches or so at least. So the driver and front passenger are sitting further apart than the 2 outboard rear seats, also giving us a much narrower center seat. The narrowing cabin gives the K4 an unusual vibe. The front seats are considerably further apart than the rear seats. Sitting right here, square in this outboard rear seat, I'm about 2 inches offset versus the driver's seat. It does sort of give me a better view, but it also means that this center seat is a lot narrower than some. All right, let's talk child seats. With the driver's seat comfortably adjusted for me at 6 feet tall, you can see I have quite a bit of clearance behind this Kleck infant seat, and this infant seat is in its base station. This is where the clearance becomes an issue, as I mentioned before. You can see how this handle is positioned here and how relatively tall it is. Getting a baby in the vehicle with this base station and that door opening, specifically that cutout there and that roof line, that was a little bit tricky. Now, the latch anchors, those are well positioned in the seats. There are no doors or flaps or anything like that to contend with, so you just fish around in there, and that's where the latch anchor is located. But the center seat position is relatively narrow. As you can see here, you could buckle someone into this center seat position. Actually, that would be the one right there for the center seat with that child seat right there, but if you put that child seat in the middle, it's actually going to interfere with one or more of the outboard seat buckles, just because of the dimensions of this rear seat bench. The top tether anchors are located just there behind the rear head restraints, and thankfully all 3 head restraints are removable, or you could just pass that top tether anchor right there underneath them so you don't have to worry about those ridges and creases that can form on top. And of course, lastly, we have those air vents in the rear, something I really appreciate on a hot day. Cargo capacity and usability are both excellent. Again, I was able to fit a 43-inch flat screen TV in here, and I can even rotate it out of the way right like that. In our 24-inch roller bag test, I was able to squeeze 4 of those bags back here. And of course, as you can see, that TV and this bag were living back here nicely. But it's not quite deep enough to let you leave a 22-inch roller bag like this in the upright position and still close that trunk lid. That's of course because of the sloping profile in the rear, but on the other hand, the wheel wells don't actually intrude on the cargo compartment more than the opening. So if you can squeak it in the opening, you probably can actually put it all the way into the vehicle. And under the floor, we even have a spare tire, but I kind of wish they gave us a cargo divider to help use some of that extra space a bit more easily. Styling is definitely a matter of personal preference, but objectively, the materials quality in here is better than we find in the Civic, the Corolla, and really most of the Japanese competition. Up here we have buttons for the telematics system, touch buttons for the LED reading lights, and a power shade for the moonroof. I am surprised about that because this is not a panoramic moonroof, and I think they could have just gone with more of a manual shade. Over here we find plastic sun visors. They're not upholstered in the same fabric that the ceiling is, but they do slide to the side, vanity mirrors there, ticket holders, etc. We have grab handles for all 4 seating positions, but if I look back there towards the rear, you can see really how aggressively that roofline cuts down on rear passenger access. Height adjustable shoulder belts are found up here for the driver and front passenger, and adjustable head restraints with that definitely eccentric design, kind of like the bell on a brass instrument there, and you can see that sort of coat hanger behind. We have a 2-tone upholstery in this model with the GT line badging right there. These seats are heated and ventilated, but you won't find that option on most trims. You do have to work your way all the way up to the top in order to get that functionality. Moving over to the doors, we find a bit more soft touch material than we find on average in this segment. So a sort of soft touch upper section there, not as squishy as this insert here, but it is wrapped in a softer material. We then find harder plastics down there at the bottom of the door around that bottle holder, etc. Ambient light strip right there, and a soft touch armrest. Moving over to the dashboard, we find a soft touch upper section of the dash, ambient lighting strip, kind of a knurled metal effect trim. It's not metal at all. It is, of course, just a plastic strip there, but thankfully less shiny black plastic than we find in so many options in this segment. I'm really, really happy with that. We do have this shiny gray strip running across the dashboard, but running your finger across it and looking closely at it, it doesn't seem to scratch as easily as the piano black that we find in so many vehicles, and the fine scratches that I do see on really close inspection are not very obvious. Most of the other plastics in here are matte, which definitely helps out. So the buttons here, and we thankfully still have a lot of physical buttons, these are all kind of a matte black plastic. We'll take a look at the infotainment system in just a second. Going down the dashboard, that matte plastic thing continues down here. We find a USB-C charge-only port, a port that can be switched between charge-only and interface, and then a Qi wireless charging mat that had no problem charging some of those larger smartphones. It has these little bumpers to keep your phone from slipping around too much, which is kind of nice, but I sort of wish they had put the charging mat just off to one side, because when your phone is in that charging mat, as you can see, the space on either side is not overly useful. We have a pretty typical console shifter over here, auto brake hold, engine start stop button over there, button for the surround view camera right there, and 2 really, really big cup holders. If you kind of prefer drinking soda cans, then you might find these actually on the large side, but if you like those large takeout drinks, they're no problem, and you can push them out of the way right like that. Sorry, I got keys in here, so that way you can use that center console for storing other knickknacks. Over here we have a soft touch rubbery style armrest that opens to reveal a moderately sized storage compartment, and then you can see those air vents right there behind. Now going back up here to the main screen, we find the Kia twin LCD setup in the dashboard, but there is a consideration. The climate control readouts are not over there. They're in this little LED gauge that bridges the gap between the 2 screens. And for most drivers, it's going to look like that, where you actually can't see that screen through that steering wheel. So if you tend to set and forget your climate control system like I do, it's not going to be a problem, but if you like to fiddle with those options regularly, then it is going to be a problem. We have full screen Apple CarPlay here. You can see that's actually the extent of the LCD. Everything else there is the climate control LED display right there. And we have the latest software from Kia that features mapping there, all the usual integrations, but no Google mapping interface or anything like that in this generation just yet. The instrument cluster, it is configurable. You can choose a few different themes here, but it's still not going to give you anything like a moving map display or anything along those lines. The steering wheel, it's Kia's latest Squircle design, where we have a flat top and a flat bottom. Pretty aggressive sport grips on the side and even down here on the bottom. This is actually one of the more attractive and I think one of the more comfortable steering wheels in this segment, with the exception of the airbag cover. I think that, it's okay, but I think they could have gone with maybe something a little bit sportier or more elegant, something along those lines. They give us the drive mode button down here. We just have normal and sport. Over here we have infotainment buttons. Over here we have cruise control buttons, and then we do have paddle shifters on the back of the steering wheel. The glove compartment, logically that's over here on the passenger side. It's a bin style, but it's not big enough to accommodate an 11-inch tablet. I know not everybody is a fan of the twin screen style setup on the dashboard, but this is definitely easier to clean than that cheese grater setup we have in the Civic. One sad part is that we don't find a head-up display in the US, even though it looks like the dashboard is cut out for one. All right, it's time to get this out on the road and find out why this is a GT line, not a GT. We do get just a little hint of front wheel peel there from a start, and that's because we don't have the most aggressive tires on this model. They're a Kumho Majesty tire, kind of an averagey, maybe even slightly below average all-season tire in terms of their grip. Obviously, you'd get, a little bit less wheel peel if you had summer tires or even a grippier all-season on this, but you're not going to get that much faster 0 to 60. This model repeatedly ran 0 to 60 in 7 seconds even. And that's because we're down on power versus the previous generation model with that actual GT 1.6 liter turbo. We also have an 8-speed automatic transmission rather than the DCT that had some pretty aggressive starting ratios in the DCT, and the torque converter obviously saps just a little bit of fun. Then we have the general tuning of the engine. You'll notice, if I slow down again, that we don't have a lot of oomph until the engine hits about 4,000 RPM. Then the turbo really comes on the boil, and that's where you'll feel all the torque happening. It is still significantly more fun than the 2.0 liter engine, don't get me wrong, but it's not as exciting as the previous model, and it's certainly no competition to something like a Civic Si. Obviously, no manual transmissions happening here either. On the other hand, this is relatively light, and even though it doesn't have a brake upgrade, stopping distances were actually pretty solid. 115 feet from 60 miles an hour to 0 is certainly shorter than average for this segment. As far as the handling score goes, this model absolutely gets an A. Now remember, this is the GT line with the 1.6 liter turbo, so we get an independent suspension in the back. That is really the only major chassis change between this and the 2 liter base engine. We don't find bigger brakes, we don't really find better tires, but we do get a slightly changed suspension as far as the firmness of the suspension, and a pretty major change to the design of the suspension in the back with that fully independent unit, shared with the Hyundai Elantra, of course. But I think that this feels sharper and a bit better connected than that Elantra. The independent rear suspension is also going to be noticeable out on a rougher road like this gravel road that we have here with potholes, speed bumps, etc. It doesn't become as upset as the base suspension, but to be honest, the base suspension is actually pretty well done. It's pretty common, and oddly enough, increasingly common in this segment, for a lot of vehicles to not have the option for a fully independent suspension in the rear. We see that, for instance, in the Mazda 3. And the big reason you want a fully independent suspension is because the rear end is more controlled. Whether we're talking about freeway expansion joints in the corners or roads like this, or just your favorite winding mountain road that is not going to be perfectly paved, that's where you want a fully independent rear suspension. It just helps those rear tires grip onto the road better. Now on the downside, the independent suspension comes with a slightly firmer suspension tune in this model, so I am going to drop the ride quality down just a little bit. I'd say this is a B, maybe a B- for ride quality. It's still pretty comfortable, don't get me wrong, but compared to the typical suspension setup in this segment, it is going to be a little bit firmer. Cabin noise came in at 62.5 decibels. Now keep in mind they repaved the road that we test on, so if you're going to compare this to the last time we drove the K4, that's the reason for the difference. The tires, etc., they're just about the same. They just repaved the road surface. So also keep that in mind if you're comparing this to some of our older videos where we're testing the competition. I don't think this is any quieter or any louder appreciably than something like a Honda Civic, but it is quieter and more refined than a Toyota Corolla, especially the engine noise. This 1.6 liter engine is pretty muted. You don't really hear it in daily driving. You'll hear just a tiny bit of that turbo now and then climbing hills. If you floor it, You do get some of that engine sounds coming into the cabin, but I think it's actually relatively pleasing for this segment. Definitely sounds better than a lot of the smaller turbo engines that you might want to cross-shop this against. What is surprisingly fantastic is fuel economy. We've been averaging 35.2 miles per gallon over a week of mixed driving, and it's been relatively hot. It's been in the 90-degree range in the Bay Area, and we've been driving there every day, so definitely air conditioning on, cranked up every single day that we've been driving this, and it's a dark interior, so that kind of gives you some idea of the air conditioning load. I had honestly not expected fuel economy to be this much better than the outgoing model. DCTs are usually pretty efficient, but this 8-speed automatic transmission and the 1.6-liter turbo, as they've been retweaked, definitely seem to punch well above their weight. I had been kind of curious why Kia was not giving us a hybrid system here, and maybe this is why. Fuel economy in a Civic hybrid is going to be better than this, obviously, but how much better and how much impact does that have on your pocketbook? Not as much as you might think, jumping from 35 up to, maybe 40 or 45 miles per gallon. You'll see a bigger difference if you chose something like a Prius, or if you got an Elantra hybrid, because the Elantra hybrid does get really good fuel economy, but you get less power in that Elantra. To frame the comparisons properly, we should probably talk about pricing, then get back to the comparisons. It's important to note that the prices on your screen are all 2025 except for the Civic and the Corolla, because they have announced 2026 pricing. And we have seen a bit of a jump for 2026 in pretty much every car company that has announced new pricing, likely somewhat due to tariffs and just general inflationary concerns. In this segment, most of the pricing bumps have been somewhere between $500 and $750, although the Corolla actually sees a slightly lower base price increase than we've seen on average, about $400 for that base model. But certainly keep in mind that the 2026s are probably going to be a bit pricier. The K4, it's right in the thick of things, starting at $23,185 and going on up to $31,880. Bear in mind that the prices on your screen do not include high-performance trims, so no Elantra N, no Civic Type R, no Civic Si, or anything like that. With pricing out of the way, let's talk about the competition. First up, we have the Volkswagen Jetta. It has a regular automatic and a 1.5-liter turbo standard, two things that I do appreciate. It's also roomy, but it's a little on the plain, maybe boring side. It handles well, but there's not too much about the visual aesthetic, inside or outside, that's overly exciting. But it is relatively inexpensive. Next up, we have the Mazda 3. This is a tough one, because the Mazda 3 is available with that 2.5-liter turbo. That is tons and tons of fun. But the base model, it has a 6-speed automatic transmission, which I'm not the biggest fan of. On the other hand, it does have 191 horsepower, so certainly more power than we find on average, and it has a regular automatic transmission in a segment that's full of CVTs. So there are pros and cons. I think the exterior is fantastic looking, but the interior, I've never warmed up quite to the minimalist style that we find from Mazda in this particular model. We don't know whether it's going to get a complete redesign soon, but we know that 2026 is basically going to be the same Mazda 3. The downside for the Mazda 3 is that it looks fantastic and has a lot of go, but the handling capability of the vehicle actually I think falls a little bit behind a number of the competitors, mainly because of the rear suspension design and Mazda's desire to have fuel economy numbers that are competitive, so the tires are a little on the skinny side in most trims. Next up, we have the Nissan Sentra. This is an easy win if you're simply looking for a discount option. It is definitely less expensive than average. It has the lowest starting price and really the lowest pricing range in this segment. And our local dealers here are offering $1,500 to $2,000 off Sentra models without even asking. The next one's coming around the corner, so if you want a steal, get yourself a Sentra. You'll probably be getting some incredible cash deals on the old model as soon as that 2026 comes online. Next up, we have the sister ship, the Hyundai Elantra. I do kind of like the look of the K4 more on the outside and the look of the Elantra a little bit more on the inside. But these are very, very competitive vehicles to one another because they're sister ships. We have about the same kind of interior room. We have basically the same drivetrains, except for the hybrid. And I'm sad about that. We don't get a hybrid K4, but we do get a hybrid Elantra. And that Elantra is fantastically efficient. Now, the logical reason that we don't have a hybrid K4 is probably because the Kia Niro exists. If you recall, way back when, Hyundai and Kia launched their hybrids as Ioniq and Niro, the original Ioniq, not the electric one.
And going forward, they sort of replaced that Ioniq with the hybrid Elantra, and the Niro still occupies that sort of hybrid space in the Kia lineup. If you want the hybrid sedan, go get the Hyundai. If you want the hybrid hatchback, get the Kia. That's basically what's going on there. Although, again, I would love to see a hybrid K4, especially a hybrid K4 hatch. Then we have the Toyota Corolla. This is small on the inside, and I think it's starting to feel dated inside as well. But it's never really sold on style. It's usually sold on reliability, that promise of extreme Toyota reliability, which has definitely been proven correct whether we're talking about the regular CVT equipped model or the hybrid. Now, none of them are terribly swift, none of them are terribly exciting, except for the GR Corolla, of course, and I think the parts and materials quality inside just doesn't feel as nice as the average entry in this segment. But again, it's selling on reliability, and it's actually really priced well. Even that 2026 model really compares nicely to the 2025s when it comes to price. And that hybrid system is quite efficient, and you can get all-wheel drive with that hybrid model in some trims. And all-wheel drive is definitely a nice-to-have option. The trickiest competitor here, of course, is the last one, and that is the Honda Civic. Style-wise, I think the K4 is more attractive, inside and outside, and I like the infotainment system better than the one that we find in the Civic. Materials quality, I also think that Kia punches above their normal weight here as well. The Civic has some nice parts here and there, but the top-end trims don't have air vents in the back, and I think some of the materials qualities and choices are better on the Kia side. Style-wise and functionality-wise, I also think that things are a little bit better in the Kia. Honda went with a few too many shiny black plastics in some high-traffic areas, and that cheese grater dashboard style is really, really difficult to clean, something I instantly noticed since I live in a dusty area in the country, and the interior is always sucking in at least a little bit of dust. But the Honda has that two-motor hybrid system, and this is a little tricky too, because that hybrid starts at $29,295, basically only $10 off from the GT line turbo. So yes, the Honda Civic Hybrid is fantastic, but it doesn't really compete with the base engine in the K4. That's base engine to base engine. And they're again kind of evenly matched. I would probably go for the K4 over the style. If you want that longer warranty because you're worried about it, you do have that 10-year, 100,000-mile powertrain warranty in the Kia, although I don't have any cause for concern for Honda's base drivetrain, so I wouldn't really worry about that on that side. Hybrid, though, that is the tricky one, because if you are close to being able to afford it, you will get that promise of ROI on the fuel economy, and you get heaps and heaps of power. If it was GT line turbo versus Civic Hybrid wins for me absolutely. I don't mind the slightly boring styling on the outside. I don't mind the cheese grater on the dashboard, because that hybrid system is really fun. Not only is it more fuel efficient than average in this segment, it's not Prius level fuel efficient, but it's more efficient and it's really, really swift. If you're at the stoplight races, you will beat a Civic Si every single time 0 to 60. It's really, really quick and very smooth. There's really not a lot to not love about that Civic Hybrid, other than the fact that it's not in every Civic. And if it was, it'd be an easy win. So bottom line here, K4 is a really solid option. I would probably, though, go for Elantra Hybrid, or of course, if we're talking about the turbo model here in the K4 lineup, I would Civic Hybrid instead. But if you're looking for a mainstream option, you don't want to worry about a hybrid system. I mean, there's nothing to worry about, but if you are worried about a hybrid system, then go ahead and get a regular K4. Let me know what you think about that down there in the comment section below, and what's your top pick in this segment. See all of you later.